Welcome to White Horse Studio. I'm Deb Mackey, and I am a leather worker. I work in both miniature and full-size pieces. Today, I'm going to show you how to use this wonderful tool, the Tandy Safety Beveler, to skive your leather and make it thinner. Get my camera to change over, we'll be all set. There we go. All right. First thing I'm going to show you how to do is switch the blade out. This one's got a blade in it, but it's pretty dull, so I need to get a new one in there. So don't do this with your fingers. It will make you bleed. Don't ask me how I know. Anyway, get a pair of needle nose pliers and push that blade. It's kind of in a groove here. I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, but it fits into this little folded over piece of metal there. Push that blade back a little bit. Grab it with your pliers and deposit it in the safe receptacle of your choice. I keep my extra blades in a little tube, and I very carefully pull one out. They tend to like to stick together, so make sure you only got one. Grab that. Now make sure that if you're putting this in with your right hand, which you probably will be, that the sharp end is to the right. You can see this little kind of a groove there that this blade fits into. And very carefully slide it in there, like so. And you go. All right, and then make sure that it is covering that hole. There's a hole right here. Make sure that both ends of it are past the hole. And now you have a fresh blade. Push it back in with the pliers. All right, we're done. Now, the way this blade works is it's got a curve to the tool has a curve to it. You can see that. And that's why they call it a beveler. It's actually, I think, designed for thicker leather, of which I have a piece right here. This is a scrap that I was playing with. I have a set of embossing plates, and that's where this horse design came from, but it's a scrap. So this is a pretty thick piece of leather, and I'm using this as a demo so you can see better how this actually works. So what you do is you take your safety beveler thing and you set it down, and the way that you can decide how deep or how narrow you want, or how not narrow, but how thin you want the skive to be, you kind of figure out where that sweet spot is in the blade. This takes practice, and you basically, if you're a righty, you pull it forward like that. And I just took a nice piece of leather off there. Now if I want to make it thinner, I can do it again. With a nice fresh blade in there, you can take a lot of leather off. When we're working in miniature, you're not going to be taking that kind of leather off. Now, this is how thick this leather is. And I've skived it down a bit thinner here. I can make it even thinner. I can do it again and again and again. This is really good for taking this much off, like when you're working on a belt. Now I'm kind of doing a rough job of it, but if you're very careful, you can take it and make a very consistent line. I generally keep my knuckles right on the surface I'm working on. I'm working on a piece of marble tile so I don't tear up my workbench. And I can very carefully hold that angle and get a much neater edge than I did there. I was just kind of tearing it off. Now, I'm a righty. That's why I did it that way. If you're a lefty, you're going to be doing it pushing the blade. And it can be done. It's a little awkward for me because I'm not a lefty, but I'm going to show you how lefties do this. Your blade is going this way, so you're going to have to push that blade. So with this piece of leather, I'm going to hold it down with my fingers, and I kind of help push it with my thumb. So you can see it can be done. Like I said, I'm a little more awkward with it because I'm not a lefty, but this is how it can be done. Obviously, I'm working on a thick piece of leather, but you can also do it on the thin leather. Now I'm sliding around. So anyway, I highly recommend watching videos by Annie Libertini. She's a very well-known leather worker, and she's a lefty, and she uses this tool, and she does a fabulous job with it. Here's how you can skive a thick piece of leather with this tool. If you're doing miniature stuff, you're probably using a much thinner piece of leather. This is a very thin piece of leather, but for this, I want to make it even thinner because once I've cut it out and I'm going to make this little miniature handbag, I want it to be so thin that I can fold this over when I put it all together at the end. Otherwise, if I try to do it with something that's thicker, it's not going to stay. And this could probably even be a little bit thinner, but sometimes I let it go because I don't want to cut a hole in it, which is very easy to do in thin leather, especially when you've got a fresh blade, which this thing does have. So basically, I'm going to do the same thing with this leather. This is what I would have the pattern drawn out on, and you can either do it before you cut it out or after. So say I've got a couple of handbags tooled out on here. I'm going to turn it over, and I've also sprayed it with a little water so it's a little bit damp. Veg-tan leather tends to be really stiff. This one was sprayed with a little water too. So I'm going to do the same thing, only I'm going to probably tip it up a little higher. It's going to go basically this way. And very carefully take a tiny bit off like this. And I start with an edge of whatever I'm working on, and you go slow. And because I've got a brand new blade in it, I can take a little more off, but let me show you what happens when you get going, and all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you've skived a hole in it. It'll take it right through the middle of it. The last thing you want to do is after you spent a whole lot of time tooling out a really nice little handbag or whatever is cut a hole in it. So the best thing to do is to take it really slow, really careful. Every time I sit down to work on handbags like these little tiny things, I have to practice on scrap for a while just to get in the groove of doing this, because it's very easy to get overconfident and take off way too much and cut a hole right through what you just tooled. Now, we're not going to be perfect with this. We're not machines. And this blade, it's fortunate they're very inexpensive, because you'll make a few passes, and if you've got a really tough piece of leather, it's going to be dull within seconds. Sometimes it's a little better to dull it down a little bit on a piece of scrap so it's not quite so radical when you go to cut your nice piece. Now, I've managed to take this much of this piece and make it about half as thin as it was. It's not paper thin, but it's getting there. And I can kind of feel where the places on it are still a little thick, and I want to take a little more off. Like I said, this is the same deal when you're doing it lefty. Now, like I said, I'm awkward because I'm not a lefty. And you do kind of push it with your thumb, helps it to do, but you've got to have something to hold down your piece of leather. The other way you can do it is just a little bit going this way. Some pieces of leather have a grain to them, some don't. I mean, this is animal hide we're working with, and every single hide is different. Some of them are tough, some of them are not, some of them have scars. So I'm just going away toward the edge here, taking off tiny bits. And that's a little bit thinner. When I'm making handbags, I make the edges a little more thinner than the middle, because the middle, except for where the top folds over, like here, when you fold this little piece over, that needs to be thin. But this part in here, it can be thicker. Nobody's going to see that because it's going to be inside the bag. But anyway, this is how I do that. Now, after I've practiced on my scrap, here's a cutout piece that you normally have tooling on it. You can do that with this too. After it's cut, I start with the edges. Very tiny bits at a time. You can always take it off, but you can't put it back on. Well, in most cases. I've been known to skive holes in things, and sometimes I turn it around and go this way. These are pieces that I've cut out on my laser because I'm too lazy to do it with a knife, but not everybody has a laser. So You know, I'm taking just a little bit off here. But that's why these have dark edges, because they've got laser burn on them, and that's a whole nother story. But I've taken this one from that thick on that side to that thick on this side, just with that couple swipes of that knife. So that is how you thin vegetable tanned leather with the safety skiver from Tandy Leather. These are rather inexpensive. They're kind of primitive, but like I said, there's a lot of different ways you can skive leather, but this goofy tool that goes for about $7 on Tandy's website is the one I always come back to. And it's the one that I use in my classes. So whether you're right-handed or left-handed, if you've never used this tool before, it's going to be pretty awkward for you. So I suggest using both ways and see what works for you. Well, that was the Tandy Safety Beveler. Hope you enjoyed this video.